Hi guys, thank you for coming back to my shop again. I'm Gregory Glessner, the owner here at Homestead Strings, and I'm glad to have you here. This is the fourth of my 8-week series called Strings, How and Who, and it's actually the last of the how part of the series, where we get to talk about bows. Today we'll be exploring some different aspects of the bow and just what makes them work the way they do. You'll also get to see me at the bench taking apart a bow in the process of rehairing it. The main part of the bow is called, aptly, the stick. It's the long part. Now, it's got this curve in it. How does that curve get there? Amazingly, sticks start out life straight, at least wooden ones do. How do you get that curve into a straight piece of wood, not break the said piece of wood, and have that curve stay in the piece of wood? The secret is a bit of heat from an alcohol flame. This is fun. Alcohol is the preferred fuel because it burns, as far as fuels go, relatively cool, so there's less risk of scorching and burning the stick. It also does not leave any residue or soot after it burns, so there's no black stuff that gets on the bow when it's recambered. Wood is a bunch of cellulose fibers glued together by a natural glue called lignin. When the wood is heated, the lignin softens and melts. And when that happens, it allows the fibers to slide past one another as the stick is bent. If the stick is bent while it is hot, the fibers slide in the lignin cools, and everything's stuck in place, and so the curve stays. Cambering a bow requires patience and skill. 1, you can't break it. 2, you can't scorch it. 3, you have to get the camber right. Minor adjustments can be done freehand, as I did, but cambering a stick for the first time or during major recambering requires a mold to which the stick is pinned. Another rule is that you shouldn't be distracted by making a video when doing this to someone's actual bow. All bows will lose camber over time as they're used and played, because as the stick is straightened as the hair is tightened, you get a little bit of what is called creep. Creep is when something moves or shifts its shape very, very slowly over time. And as you straighten the stick, it will not quite return to where it came from. If you leave your bow tight a lot, you will greatly accelerate this process. Wood bows can be recambered pretty easily, although carbon fiber and fiberglass bows can't. The weight and balance of a bow are two very, very important characteristics. Weight, honestly, as important as it is just a number. This bow weighs 62.5 grams. I see people get way too caught up in those numbers instead of just playing the bows and seeing what they like. Balance in a bow is perhaps even more important than weight. Balance refers to primarily where the balance point of the bow is. The balance point is the point at which you can balance it at one point. Scientifically, this is known as the center of gravity of the bow. Between violin, viola, cello, and bass bows, the weights usually fall in a pretty narrow range, and so do the balance points. They don't differ by that much from bow to bow. We know that stuff has inertia, which means it's difficult to move, or once it is moving, it's difficult to stop moving. If the balance point is farther out from the player's hand, it means that there is, relatively speaking, more stuff out towards the tip. And that stuff is hard to move. It makes a lot of feeling of weight for the player, and it can even crush the tone of an instrument, even if the bow is relatively light. Conversely, if the balance point is very close to the player's hand, even a very heavy bow might not put a lot of force into the string and might not play the instrument well, and the player will feel the bow as very light and whippy. There's also the stiffness of the stick, which refers to how much a player can put into it and how easily it bends. Now, some bows are not very stiff at all and would be crushed under the weight required to play some strings and some instruments. However, some other bows are very stiff. That can be too stiff for some instruments, as it doesn't allow enough cushioning for the string to be able to move underneath of it. Quantifying all factors that affect the performance and feel of a bow is practically impossible. You just have to play different bows and sort of know what you like and figure out what sounds good for you. We just talked about characteristics that make different sticks play and perform differently. But how does the hair actually work on the string? There's a widely perpetuated myth out there that the hair has little hooks or barbs on it that grab the string. This is just not true. Here's what raw horsehair sounds like on a violin. Certainly doesn't sound like I have a lot of grab there. And in fact, if you look at horsehair under a microscope, it's practically smooth. But what does grab a string? Rosin. Rosin has just the right friction characteristics to make sound possible. Listen to this. That sounds a lot better, don't you think? Rosin is actually just boiled down tree sap. Now, I mentioned the word friction. What is friction? Friction is just resistance between two things moving against one another. Sounds simple, but there are also two types of friction. There is static friction, which is the friction between two objects that are not moving against one another. You might notice that it is harder to break loose something that is not moving, while it's a whole lot easier to keep it moving. The resistance while you are keeping something moving is called kinetic friction, and that is very often a lot less than the static friction between two objects. Rosin on bow hair has a very high static friction, which means it's very hard to break it loose once it's stuck to something. However, its kinetic friction, or its friction while moving, is very low. This makes ideal conditions for stick slip motion because you get a really good stick and an easy slip. You can simulate this at home. If you take a plate and put a thin layer of honey on a small area. Let it dry for a while. After it's dried, you might notice that if you stick your finger to it, it's very sticky. It's kind of stuck there. But if you are moving, it actually feels pretty slick. Honey and rosin really aren't that much different. Tree sap has some waxes, maybe a little bit of oil content, and a lot of sugar. Sugar is sticky, but as you learned with the honey, if you are moving on it, it's pretty slippery. Now this is the last of me just talking at you for this video. We're going to cut over to my bench, where you'll get to see some disassembly and construction of a bow. Once you see this, you will wonder why more bows don't just come flying apart. It's pretty awesome. A critical part of how a bow is put together is the knots at the end of the hair. You don't see them usually, but if they fail, you'll definitely know it. I use a strong nylon thread and wrap it around the hair as many times as I can, pulling each loop very, very, very tight. I compare the length of the knot with the mortise, which is just a fancy word for a hole shaped to accept another piece and hold it tightly, just to make sure it will fit. Snip, get rid of the excess string. Compare once again to see where to cut the hair, and... oh, my wife just loves that sound. I just toss the excess. As an insurance policy, I coat the end of the hairs and the knot in cyanoacrylate glue. More traditional methods use rosin powder burned and melted into the hair ends, but I find that this method is stronger and more reliable. I don't want this knot going anywhere. I then use a piece of wood to work the glue farther into the hair and get a good coating on the end of the knot. There's the finished knot. I always make sure to close my glue bottle. That stuff's expensive. The knot is held in by a wooden plug. No glue, no other mechanical means. The plug is shaped to fit the mortise exactly with a bit of room for the hair to pass through. Even without the hair, the plug cannot turn out when pulled in the direction the hair will pull it. It is a geometrical lock, not friction that holds the hair in. Here's what the plug itself looks like. I make these plugs out of maple because it's hard and it has a bit of springiness that helps everything lock together. The knot goes in first, making sure that it's centered in the mortise and that the hair is spread evenly. And the plug goes in on top of it. I know I said that friction isn't what holds things together, but if the plug is too loose, this can happen. I just overestimated how much room I'd need for the hair. I cut another plug, and the result is perfect. At the frog, the most visible aspect of the hair's security measures is the spread wedge. This is a piece of soft wood driven in tightly where you see it, and it spreads the hair into hopefully a thin, even, and wide ribbon. After pulling off the ferrule, which is the silver D-shaped ring where the hair comes out, you can see what the spread wedge itself looks like. Another part of the frog is the pearl slide. This name is sometimes a misnomer, because I'm not convinced that this one is pearl, and it certainly didn't slide very easily. Dirt, rosin, and other things can gum up the action of it. I like them when I can just stick my thumb or other finger to it and slide it right out. I had to put this one in my frog holder and tap on it with a little hammer and a stick with a piece of tape. I hate having to do this. It just feels wrong to bang on such fragile stuff. But that got it loosened up. There's the slide itself, not inside of the bow. I peel the hair back, which exposes a plug somewhat like the one at the tip. It works the same way. I then take a little chisel and free it up, which then frees the old hair to come out. The ferrule is an interesting piece. It actually starts out life as just sheet metal. The curved part is cut out and bent into shape. It is then soldered or glued with molten metal to the flat part. This is actually a weak point, and it is possible to split the solder joint when driving in a spread wedge. Luckily, there are ways to get a good spread without resorting to ferrule breaking force. Players almost never think about the most basic function of their bows, tightening and loosening. We're taught from an early age to loosen our bows when we're done playing, but most young players never give a second thought to how this actually works. The nut that we turn has a screw that sticks into the end of the stick, and it goes through a threaded brass eyelet attached to the frog. The screw actually pulls the eyelet and the frog back and forth as the nut is turned. When the frog moves back, that's what pulls on the hair and tightens the stick. And when the frog moves forward, that is what loosens the hair and releases the tension on the stick. Well, that's it for the video for today. I hope you're all out there staying healthy, whatever you're out there doing, wherever you are. This is a fun project for me. I really enjoy sharing with you the things that I think about as a player, as a musician, as a violin repair guy, and just as a person. I know most players don't think about some things the way I do, and that's okay. But I hope that these videos are sparking curiosity, because curiosity is what drives learning. You can learn a lot more from your own curiosity than from any teacher out there. I want you all to ask how, why, what, who. Ask a lot of questions. Dig. Be curious. Find something that you're passionate about. If it's not this, that's fine with me. But it is your curiosity that makes you take ownership of your own learning. And that is what I want. Find what you want to learn, be passionate about it, be curious about it, and own it.